Stop. Before you do that, I might have already read your story. Hello, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick, and today we're going to talk about the things that I see constantly in writing that are not very helpful. So I've been editing someone else's manuscript recently, and I do this fairly frequently. It's something that I enjoy doing, and maybe someday I'll be able to offer my services for money. And there are a couple things that I consistently see, especially in new authors or first-time authors or novice authors, or people just working on their first book or maybe their second book, just somebody that's not, you get what I'm saying. So there are these common mistakes or common elements that I see in novice writer writing that does not help the story. And so today we're going to cover those things. So the number one thing that I see in newbie writer books is, excuse my French, but the doomy eyes that are being given to the romantic love interest. So maybe they already hate each other. Oftentimes, especially with romance, there is that enemy to lover dynamic, or they're forced together for whatever reason, or the romance is a subplot in a greater work that's maybe more sci-fi or more Western or more mystery, whatever. Often there is a dead giveaway in newbie writers. There's a dead giveaway of who the main character is eventually going to be sleeping with, because somebody is giving somebody else the eyes, and it is laid on very, very heavily. So maybe they don't have the eyes, and in the narration it goes, and I just imagined what it would be like to do them. Oh no, usually it's a lot more subtle than that. Usually it's a lot of watching, a lot of admiring, and if you see the words, those eyes, in your narration, get rid of them. Oh my gosh, I don't want to tell you how to write, but if you see those eyes, and he looked at me with those icy blue eyes, they're gonna have sex. 10 times out of 10, those eyes is specifically because they're romantically looking or sexually looking at that person. Yeah. The most recent book that I've been editing is a YA sci-fi, and the love interest is introduced in chapter 2. He is 10 years old, 10 years her senior mentor in fighting, and those eyes shows up a couple of times throughout the entire novel, but especially that first time he shows up, those eyes, those muscles. I promise you're not being as subtle as you think, especially if you use those eyes. Now, I think those eyes would be funny to use for irony, for, romance comedy that is very aware of what it's doing. But if you think you're being subtle as a writer with the romantic tension between characters by those eyes and how those eyes look at you, and those eyes, you're not. Those are fuck me eyes. Element number 2 that I constantly see in newbie writers and their projects is too much exposition all the way at the front. So there's often this, what's the word that I want? Impulse to give the reader all the information, so it justifies everything that the character is doing. It justifies the character's background. It makes you not have to wonder anything as soon as possible. There's also this impulse to describe the entire world as it is, so the reader never has any questions, and so you just know. This isn't really necessary, and for the most part, you should leave your readers asking why this character acts the way they do, where they come from. Make them wonder why that character is the way they are before you jump into the exposition spring. The thing with exposition and story building, and this is how I always think about it and how I always explain it, is so your story is a hill, and your momentum, is a rock at the top of the hill. So you start on a flat plane. When you start your story, you push that rock off of the cliff and down the hill. So it starts rolling. That starts building your momentum. Now, exposition is a plateau. So imagine that you just start going and then you immediately hit a plateau. You're not going to have enough momentum to keep that ball rolling, to keep going downhill. You have to build up the momentum in order to push you over the plateau and keep going down the hill. And that is said through the exposition. So the exposition is the plateau. The plot itself is the hill, the arc, the moving action, all of that. So you want your character doing something. Get me involved in your character. Get me wrapped up in your character. Make me care about your character before you throw the exposition at me. Because exposition and backstory are not a shortcut to making the reader care about your character. In fact, too much exposition up front can turn the reader off of your character and off of your story. Common element number 3 is using creative verbs instead of said. So I see it a lot with, if you're not sure what I mean by this, I mean inquire, answer, replied, yelled, screamed, barked. I don't know why. I absolutely hate bark. Demonstrated is one that I recently saw. So anything that can be used instead of said. And for the most part, this really isn't necessary. Of course, this is more personal preference than anything. But most of the advanced authors that, I follow and like, again, so personal preference, they said is usually enough. The dialogue tags are there specifically for the reason so that authors know who is talking, who that sentence belongs to. And so you don't have to use creative words. Said really is not that repetitive. Most people actually just don't even notice it when they're reading because they're just looking for the character tag. It's basically the same as just starting the line with name, dialogue. But when you start using creative words, one, it can get confusing because the words might not actually fit the sentence. Like I had one in a story I was recently working on where it said, so-and-so answered, but they were talking to somebody else. So, like, person 1 says something, person 2 answered, but person 2 is actually talking to person 3 who's not involved in this conversation at all. So it doesn't make any sense. The other problem with using creative verbs is it's telling, and you shouldn't have to tell the reader what the intentions of the character are. So it's kind of like you'll see people and editors and writers, be down on using adjectives after said, like she said softly, she said quietly, she said lustfully. They'll say, watch out for doing that. Well, when you use special verbs, you're also kind of telling. So if somebody has written, hey, get back here with that, he leaned out the door, I can assume that he's yelling from the exclamation point. If somebody says, shh, be quiet, I should be able to infer from that sentence and the situation around it that they're whispering. But when I see, shh, be quiet, he whispered, I feel like I'm being talked down to. I'm being told what the context is instead of it being shown to me. And that's one of the situations where you do not need to tell. You can just show or should be showing because it'll have me in the scene. Using those special words can actually take the reader out of the scene. It's not to say that you cannot ever use special verbs for said, but they should technically be sprinkled rarely in there for emphasis, but not used in abundance. Number 4 elements that I see in new writers, and I did a video on this before when I was answering Reddit questions, is thoughts in italics. So often in newbie works, I will see, especially stuff aimed at teenagers for some reason, I will see, there's your paragraph of action or something happening, maybe even internal dialogue, and then you've got a line, separate, a hard return to a new line, and then it's got something that's being thought in italics. She walked into the room. There were magazines all over the ground, a pile of dirt, and a couple of empty cans. The place was gross. Italics. This place is so nasty. And italics. So it would do that. And then continue with the narrative. And oftentimes I found with most thoughts in italics, the thoughts don't add to the story and in fact often just repeat what has been said or shown in the narration. So most of the time I recommend not using thoughts in italic. There are some times that you can do it and get away with it and it's great. But often when I see it, it is not done very well. It's repetitive. It actually takes away from the tension, and it's used as an opportunity to tell the reader something that we technically either did infer or should have been able to infer or already recognized from the paragraph above, and it's just not necessary. Common element number 5 is not letting the MC make bad decisions that actually hurt them. So I sort of touched on this in my last video where main characters aren't allowed to do bad things or what the writer considers as a bad thing. And a lot of times this is sort of related to that, but it's got its own little difference. A lot of times authors will not want to actually hurt their baby because they've already, one, decided what way the story needs to go, and they can't mess up the story's direction, and two, the character is not allowed to make people dislike them. Like characters in the story or the readership is not allowed to like them, usually both. And so say a character is getting really, really mad at another character because she wasn't allowed to do what she wanted to do. So instead of actually running away or smacking the guy and running out the door or doing anything that's actually disruptive, she will have this whole internal monologue of how much she hates that person, how much she is not going to listen to him, how much she wants to be free, but then she's not going to take action to follow up those words because it could mess up other things. So imagine this chick is really, really mad at this guy that's at, so girl is mad at her parents. This will be the situation. Girl is mad at her parents because her parents just grounded her. She could sneak out the window. She's going up to her room because she's grounded, and she just starts, she's got this whole internal monologue going of how much she hates her parents and how they're ruining her life, and then she just goes into her room and sits down. She could jump out the window. She could get in trouble with her parents because they go up to say, I'm sorry, we overreacted, and then not find her there. However, because the author already has it planned out where they want the story to go, they can't have her respond like that. So they don't make that decision. There's also the situation where authors want their main characters to be sympathetic to the reader, so they don't ever actually let their character externally act like a jerk. They'll say things mentally that makes them a jerk, but then everything they do is morally okay, socially okay, just fine, so that you don't actually end up hating them. If a main character acted like a complete twat, and not, didn't just think like a twat, but actually did things that hurt the people around them because they were selfish, you would dislike them so much more than if they just had an internal monologue about how they wanted to take everything for themselves and then just never acted on it. So I think there is some kind of fear of letting characters make bad decisions, whether it's for fear that the main character will be disliked or it will mess with the direction of the plot. But when you do this, it takes away from the surprise elements of the plot. Element number 6 is some super bad, super powerful guy everyone is afraid of, and the main character should be careful, but they decide they're not going to. So tell me if you've read this book before. Main character is going to go and meet this super powerful person. They know he's super powerful. They're like, oh my gosh, this guy could kill me. This guy could change my whole career. I could just cease existing. He could destroy my family. I need to be careful. Then he gets in there. The main character gets in there and is face to face with this guy. Everybody is bowing, letting guy be overhead, listening to him. And main character is like, you know what? Fuck this guy. I am not afraid of this guy. I am not folding. I'm not showing any respect. I'm going to be defiant. And so big boss, powerful person, issues a challenge to this person who is obstinate. And the obstinate person goes, yeah, I could take you on. I'm not going to back down, yo. I'm not going to back down. And so in the face of this defiance, where everybody else, even the most powerful fighters in this organization, has bowed and said, you're the leader, this new person who is less trained than everybody else is completely defiant. And the boss goes, wow, you sure are brave. Okay, I'm not going to kill you. How many times have you read that? Because I have read it a lot. As soon as somebody introduces a big, super powerful person, and you've got this little MC that is in a new environment, is in an unsure environment, more often than not, I figure like this is where the situation's going to go. And more often than not, this is where the situation goes. Now, it's not to say you cannot have the obstinate person that defies the strong guy and gets away with it. But again, this goes back to not letting the MC make bad decisions that hurt them. What could have happened in this situation of newbie questioning the authority is the authority punishes them. And that would change the course of the storyline. That would also possibly make the readers not like them if the characters' obstinance got their troop or their friends hurt because of the obstinance. So you see how those kind of tie into each other. Common issue number 7 that I often see with newbie writers is filter words in the narrative. Stuff like I can hear, I see, I feel, I taste. You don't need that kind of stuff in the narration, especially if it's in first person. I mean, even in third person, it's really not necessary. because whatever is in the narration is what the character is recognizing. So I'm going to use first person because it's super easy, but this basically works for third person as well. If I walk into a room and I say, there's a bed against the wall, there are pink curtains, and there's a dog in the corner, I'm saying those things because I see them. And it's redundant for me to say, I walk into the room, I see a bed in the corner, I see curtains, and I see a dog. You know, if you've got a scene going on where two people are interacting with one another, it is redundant to say, I feel his arm on my shoulder. In most cases, you can do stuff like, I feel his arm on my shoulder if he's not really there. You know, like a ghost, or it's a memory and the person is remembering something. But if the two characters are in the same room and actually touching, his arm runs down my shoulder. And that's not to say you can't use I feel or I taste or I see ever, but it slows down the narrative, and in more cases than not, it's not really necessary. More often than not, it's not really necessary. And finally, the eighth common element I see in newbie writers is emotional blue balls. And this sort of goes with some of the previous points that I made, so forgive me if it's a little repetitive, but internal monologues that What I mean by emotional blue balls is internal monologues that build up the action, build up the tension, or attempt to build up the tension, and then there is no external payoff. So that goes back to not letting the MC make any bad decisions, because they're internally, oh, I want this, oh, I need this is so desperate, I hate this so much, I'm gonna get this guy, blah, 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 I hate him so much, and then there's nothing. It just falls off. The character does not take external action in order to get the thing they want. You know that this is especially happening if the internal monologue continually uses the word I want, but they never actually do anything. It's kind of like, the fluffers on a porn set that are over there off screen to help the guy get it up because he's not into his partner. And so if the strength, and this might not seem like it is a parallel, but if the strength is not in the scene, the emotional strength is not in the scene to pull in the reader and get the reader on the character's side, then you're going to end up having these monologues that try to get the reader on the character's side. And it feels so fake and so forced, instead, with no reason to actually do anything for it. So really just let your character make a decision. Really, if your character wants something, they should be figuring out how to get it. Maybe they want a sucker, but they know if they go and ask their mom for a sucker, their mom is going to say no. So what is a better way for them to go about getting it? Would they try to make a deal with their mom? Would they try to steal it? Would they try to bribe somebody else? Like, everything that your character wants should be shown through their actions, and it doesn't have to be direct actions. It can be a long, roundabout way of getting it because they're playing the long game instead of the short, straight game. That's fine. But if your character wants something, actually go for it. That will build the tension naturally. That will build the character and the reader relationship naturally, as opposed to these emotional blue ball internal monologues, and your story will be stronger for it. So those are the 8 common elements of newbie writers that I have recognized coming up a lot in manuscripts I've been reading. Let me know if you've run into them. Do you do any of them? I want to hear it in the comments down below. And if you like this kind of content, please like, share, and subscribe. Till next time, don't die.